Hello, I am Demetria Miles-McDonald, the founder and CEO of Decide Diversity and the creator of the Table of Diversity. The question I'm going to answer today is one that I get very often as it relates to the Table of Diversity, and that is, how do I decide what goes on the Table of Diversity and what does not? And let me just say, that is one of the most stressful things that I think about as it relates to business, because there's so much that can go on the table of diversity. And, it could get to a point where everything is on there and it becomes unreadable. It's not something that you can look at and decipher and really consume in a digestible way. And so I am constantly thinking about what goes on the table of diversity and what does not. Now, first off, everything on the table of diversity is backed by research. So if there's no research behind it, chances are it's not going to go on the table of diversity. And I don't mean like, are there tons of Google hits, if I were to Google it? I mean, is there something within industrial and organizational psychology research, sociology, anthropology? Like, is there something there as it relates to people at work? Because this tool is primarily for organizations. Is there something that we can tie to? Or is there something within, organizations that anecdotally we can look at and say, based on the number of organizations that are utilizing this information, this tool, we can include it in the table of diversity? That's first and foremost. I often get folks, recommending things to be on the table of diversity. One that I often hear is about body size, and that it's always a really great suggestion. I'm always like, yes, that it should be on the table of diversity, but there's not a whole lot of research that looks into body size and the impact that can have on you within the workplace. Now, anecdotally, do we have some evidence there? Absolutely. But are organizations tracking this information? No, so it kind of gets a little sticky there, because there's not going to, no, you're not going to take a culture survey where someone is going to ask you about your body size. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so there's a thin line there between what can go on the table of diversity, what should go on there, and what do I think would be, a great addition. The other thing is limiting the amount of options, and this can get really hard. So I'll take the religion column, for example. There are so many religions in the world. And I mean, even if you look at, pick one element, there's so many different sub-denominations for each of those that it can get really difficult to decide, are we going to add more of these sub-denominations? Like, where does it end? Where do the options end? And so, again, that's where we go back to research. Years ago, I took a philosophy of religion class, and it was the most fascinating thing ever, because you're not looking at one individual religion and trying to understand that religion. You're looking at religion as a whole and seeing where there are commonalities, where there are differences, and things of that nature. And so that gave me a lot of insight into how to think about that particular category. Another one that I often hear, that we need more options, is around political beliefs. And again, this is where it gets a little dicey. I think it was Pew Research just came out at some point within the last year with some research on, I think, 16 different types of political beliefs. Well, there's not 16 spaces on the table of diversity for all of those. And so how do I create a balance is essentially how I have to think about it. And to ensure that, folks can see themselves on the table of diversity, I try to incorporate buckets that are large enough so that you can see yourself in that. But again, there's always the option to create, elements if you don't see yourself. And so it is constantly on the back of my mind because I'm always asking people what's not on the table of diversity. So I guess I kind of open myself up to that, but it always results in just amazing conversation where we're able to talk about some of the nuances of why this is on there or why it's not on there. Or I can say it was on there, 3 versions ago, but it's not on there now. And so it's always just a wonderful conversation that I get to have with folks about what's on there and what's not. But at the end of the day, it's rooted in science. It comes back to the data, it comes back to the research, and it comes back to what I often say, and I'm sure if you've ever worked with me, you hear me say this a lot, it comes back to what makes sense. And sometimes, things that are not on the table of diversity, it just doesn't make sense for it to be on there because it's not going to be utilized in a way that can help us get to where we want to go. And so that's the short version of what goes on the table of diversity. And then things change over time, right? I mean, there are things on the table of diversity that weren't on there forever ago, or that have consolidated, or we just don't talk about anymore. Like it's just not a big deal anymore. And so I'm also deeply in tune with what's happening in the world regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion and people, and try to reflect what's happening in reality while also pushing the conversation forward. So balance is the name of the game when it comes to what's on the table of diversity and what's not. To get your free copy of the Table of Diversity, go to tableofdiversity.com. It's completely free. And join me back here so that I can answer more questions, talk a little bit more about the Table of Diversity, and tell me your questions in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. Thanks so much. See you soon. Bye.